The click of the car doors locking sent a jolt of terror through me. It was past 2 a.m., and my Uber driver had suddenly veered off the route home and pulled into a deserted, unlit parking lot. My heart pounded against my ribcage as I realized I was trapped in the back seat. Just minutes earlier, I had been laughing with friends at a downtown bar, blissfully unaware of the nightmare about to unfold. When I requested the Uber, the driver seemed normal enough at first. He was a middle-aged man with a greasy baseball cap and a forced smile. I noticed a faint unease when he missed the highway exit toward my neighborhood, but I assumed it was an honest mistake or a shortcut I didn't know. However, as the car ride stretched on beyond all reason, I began to fear something was very wrong. The city lights thinned out, and the streets turned unfamiliar. I think you missed the turn," I piped up from the back, trying to keep my voice steady. The driver didn't respond. Instead, he glanced at me through the rearview mirror with an expression that made my blood run cold. A mix of impatience and something darker, almost predatory. I watched anxiously as we left the populated areas entirely. We were now in an industrial part of town, warehouses and empty lots. No people or open businesses in sight. My phone's GPS still showed the blue route line back to my apartment, but the car was moving in the opposite direction. I felt a swell of panic rising. I cleared my throat. "Sir, why are we stopping here?" I managed to ask, as the driver slowed the car to a crawl in the middle of an empty lot behind an abandoned factory. That's when he wordlessly reached forward and hit the door lock button. The ominous electronic snap of the locks echoed in the silence. My stomach flipped. "Please, let me out," I said quickly, my voice now trembling. The driver turned round in his seat slowly. In the faint glow of the dashboard, his eyes looked almost black. He spoke for the first time since leaving the bar. "Eerie, not going anywhere." The finality in his tone turned my insides to ice. Adrenaline surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking violently, and tried to dial 911. In a flash, he lunged between the seats and snatched the phone from my grasp, throwing it onto the front dash far out of reach. I was now alone with a stranger in a locked car, far from help. My mind raced through horrific possibilities of what he intended to do. I pressed myself against the door, frantically pulling the handle, but of course it wouldn't open. The windows were tinted and rolled up. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, hoping against hope someone might hear me in this god-forsaken place. "Shut up," he barked, one hand suddenly clamping around my ankle. As he half-turned in his seat, I kicked instinctively, tearing my leg from his clammy grip. My heel struck his shoulder and he cursed, momentarily losing balance. In that split second, I did the only thing I could think of. I leaned forward and laid on the car horn, creating a long, blaring wail that pierced the quiet night. The noise startled him. He recoiled, hands flying up to cover his ears. Seizing the opportunity, I screamed again, even louder than before, and began slamming my fists on the window in pure desperation. My throat was raw, but I didn't care. I needed to attract attention. Perhaps it was my screams, or the blaring horn echoing off the empty buildings, that finally unnerved him. The driver's composure cracked. He started the engine again with a growl of frustration. "Fine, I'll take you home. Just stop that," he yelled over the noise. My heart was thundering, but I was not about to stop. Not until I was out of that car. I kept one hand hammering the horn sporadically, another fumbling at the window to try and crack it open, anything to signal distress. As the car began moving, he reached back, trying to swat at me, but I ducked out of his reach. He drove out of the lot and back onto the main road, all the while swearing under his breath. My eyes were darting for any sign of life outside. To my immense relief, I spotted headlights approaching, another car on the otherwise deserted road. I waved frantically through the window. The approaching vehicle flashed its high beams, perhaps noticing the commotion inside our car. The driver realized it too. Panicked, he finally unlocked the doors and snarled, "Get out. Now," before he'd even fully stopped. The car had barely come to a halt on the gravel shoulder when I threw the door open and stumbled out, nearly falling onto the ground. I heard the tires screech as he sped off into the darkness the moment I was clear. I was trembling from head to toe, but I was free. The other car, the one whose driver had flashed their lights, pulled over cautiously a short distance ahead. A man and woman got out, the woman holding up her phone's flashlight. "Are you okay? What's going on?" she called, concern in her voice. I could barely speak through my sobs of relief and terror. They stayed with me while I shakily dialed the police. I gave a report with as many details as I could. The driver's first name, the make and model of the car, the route he took, everything. By the time an officer arrived, I was starting to regain my breath, though the shock hadn't worn off. The Good Samaritans waited until I was safely with the police before leaving. They likely saved my life by not ignoring a stranger in distress. It turned out that my harrowing ordeal matched the pattern of other attempted kidnappings reported in the area. The driver I encountered had immediately gone offline on the app, ditching his identifiable route data, but he was caught a week later hiding out in a relative's home. He had done this to at least 2 other women, driving them far off course with evil intentions. I shudder to think what would have happened if I had Dan T fought back and caused a scene that night. To this day, the sound of a car door locking triggers a wave of panic in me. I haven't taken a rideshare alone since what began as a convenient ride home from a fun night out nearly became a nightmare I would never wake from. I often lie awake, wondering how many other passengers have sat where I did, hearing that dreadful click of the locks, and never made it out. The thought is enough to keep me up at night, grateful that I escaped with my life. I've been an Uber driver for over 5 years, and in that time I've had my share of strange and unsettling passengers. But nothing compares to the night. I unknowingly drove a pair of dangerous men who spoke of death as casually as discussing the weather. It was a frigid Chicago evening, well past midnight. I remember the frost on the edges of my windshield as I pulled up to a trendy downtown lounge to pick up my next fare. 2 men in tailored suits slid into the back seat, speaking to each other in rapid Russian. One was older, maybe mid-50s, with steely grey hair and a scar along his jaw. The other, younger, looked pale and anxious, his leg bouncing restlessly against the seat. "Good evening," I greeted, glancing at them in the rear view. They barely acknowledged me, too engrossed in their hushed conversation. As I merged into traffic, I heard the younger man hiss something in Russian. By sheer coincidence, I understood a little Russian from a previous job, driving for a Russian cab company years ago. My ears caught a few chilling phrases. "This is serious. Blood is on me." "I'm not a bad man," the older man responded quietly. "Relax. There are no fools here." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Blood is on me." The phrase reverberated in my head. Did I hear that correctly? My mind raced. Were they talking about an actual crime? My imagination conjured images of what could be sitting in my back seat. Mobsters, hitmen, or worse. They had only requested a short ride, just a few miles across town. As we neared the destination, a quiet block in a high-end residential area, the younger man's breathing grew ragged. The older one put a hand on his shoulder and murmured, "It's done. Keep it together." We pulled up to the address, an upscale brownstone. I shifted into park, my mouth dry. "Here we are," I managed to say. The older man quietly said, "I've got it," and produced a money clip thick with $100 bills. To my surprise, he leaned forward and, in accented English, said, "Thank you for the ride." One moment, for a split second, I truly thought I might die. Instead, his hand emerged, holding a crisp $100 bill. He extended it toward me. "My friend," he said softly, meeting my gaze in the mirror, "do we understand each other? A bribe, or perhaps a warning? Maybe both." I swallowed hard, eyes darting from the bill to the man's implacable face. Slowly, I nodded and took the money. Yes, I whispered. As soon as the door shut behind them, I exhaled a long, shuddering breath. I didn't even think to report the incident at first. I was too shaken. I simply drove. I drove 3 blocks away, pulled over, and just sat there in an empty alleyway, heart pounding. In the quiet of my car, I processed what had happened. They knew I overheard something. The older man's parting words and the $100 bill made that clear. Do we understand each other? Had chills running down my spine. The implication was obvious. Forget what I heard, or else. I didn't take any more rides that night. I went straight home, double-locked my doors, and lay awake till dawn. In the days that followed, I scoured the news for any reports that could be connected, but nothing obvious turned up. Perhaps their business was done in secret, destined to remain another unsolved mystery. Now when I pick up fares who speak in hushed tones, I can't help but get a little nervous. I learned that night that eavesdropping, even unintentionally, can come at a cost. I was lucky it was only money pressed into my hand, and not something far worse. At first I thought the man in the back seat was just being friendly. Little did I know I was about to endure the most unnerving 30 minutes of my life, trapped in a loop of questions that made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. It was early evening on a Tuesday, around 6 p.m., and I was driving near Venice Beach, California. The request came in for a pickup outside a chic office building. The passenger, a clean-cut man in an expensive navy suit, slid into my back seat carrying a briefcase. He looked like any other young professional heading home from work. "Downtown, please," he said, giving an address in the city center. His voice was polite, nothing out of the ordinary. I started the ride, merging into the thickening LA traffic. "So, how's your night going?" I asked, making the usual small talk as we inched onto the highway. He responded with a perfunctory, "Fine." Then, after a pause, he asked, "How long have you been driving for Uber?" I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was staring out the window. "Oh, about a year or so. It's a great job to meet people and earn some extra money," I answered. He nodded. "Oh, cool. Where do you stay at?" That was a slightly personal question for a stranger to ask, but I didn't mind. Maybe he was just chatty. "I live over in the valley," I replied casually. Nice," he murmured. A few seconds of silence. Then, "So, how long have you been driving for Uber?" I caught his eyes in the mirror. Wasn't he smiling or showing any hint that he realized he'd just asked the same question? I gave a polite half smile, thinking he might have forgotten he asked already. "About a year," I repeated. "It's been going well." He fell quiet, and I let out a silent breath, focusing on the road. The freeway was clogging up, as usual this time of day. We crept along. A minute passed. He cleared his throat and asked again, in the exact same tone as before, "Where do you stay at?" I felt a prickle of unease. He had already asked me that too. Was he distracted, or just messing with me? I forced a little chuckle. "Like I said, in the valley, near Sherman Oaks." No reaction. It was as if he hadn't heard me at all. He continued gazing out the window, face impassive. Another long pause. My hands were gripping the steering wheel a bit tighter now. He shifted in his seat. "So, how long have you been driving for Uber?" he asked yet again, his voice completely neutral. A cold wave of dread rolled through me. Something was very off about this. He wasn't laughing or showing any sign of joking. It was like a record skipping, a simulation glitching. My mouth had gone dry. I didn't know how to respond, so I just answered in a confused stammer. I just started, actually. Not long ago." Maybe a different answer would snap him out of this bizarre loop. "Oh, cool," he replied evenly. "Where do you stay at?" My skin crawled. The exact same intonation, the exact same words. He wasn't forgetting. He was repeating the questions verbatim, like a script. This exchange repeated itself 3 more times. Each time, my heart beat faster. We were crawling on the I-10 freeway, and I was stuck. I couldn't even pull over icily in the gridlock. My passenger's behavior was growing more unnerving by the second. He had started rubbing his head vigorously, fingers digging into his scalp as if in pain or distress. In the mirror, I saw sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His previously neat hair was now disheveled from all the clawing at his own scalp. I silently unlocked my phone and dialed 911, keeping my thumb poised over the call button just in case. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he on drugs? Having a mental breakdown? Or was this some kind of setup for a robbery, or worse, distracting me with weird questions? Suddenly, he let out a guttural curse, a single explosive shout that made me jump in my seat. It was much deeper and more feral than the polite voice he'd used before. Sir, is everything all right? I asked cautiously, trying to keep my voice calm. He snapped his head up to look at me, eyes wide and bloodshot. For the first time, I felt true fear. "Where are we?" he barked, his tone alarmed and angry. His outburst had my pulse racing. "We're on the 10 freeway, headed downtown, like you asked," I answered, trying to sound steady. "We're about 15 minutes away." He grunted and nodded, then went back to massaging his temples vigorously. The moment seemed to pass, and an eerie silence fell again. I could hear my own breathing in the quiet. The traffic was finally picking up, allowing me to move a little faster. I just wanted to get this guy to his destination and out of my car as soon as possible. We neared the downtown exit. Abruptly, he screamed once more. "Where are we?" It was like he had suddenly forgotten everything again, or woken up from a nightmare. My hands were shaking on the wheel. "Almost to your place, sir." "Just a couple miles," I managed to say, swallowing hard. He exhaled loudly, seeming to stabilize a bit. Moments later, we reached the address he had input, a swanky high-rise apartment building. I pulled up to the front and put the car in park, heart hammering with relief that this ride was almost over. The man gathered his briefcase and opened the door. For a second, he lingered, looking back in at me. My mind braced for another outburst or bizarre question, but instead, his face broke into the most genuine, friendly smile I'd seen all ride. In a completely normal voice, he said, "Have a great night. And watch out for the crazy people out there, huh?" With that casual remark, he shut the door and walked off toward the lobby, whistling to himself as if nothing unusual had happened. I sat there in stunned silence for a long moment. My whole body was trembling. What in the world just happened? One second he was shouting like a madman, the next he was perfectly cordial, even cheerful. I cancelled my next ride request and pulled away from the building, needing time to collect myself. Adrenaline still coursed through me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him still sitting there. But of course, he was gone. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the experience. I debated reporting it to Uber, but what would I even say? That a passenger asked me the same question 5 times and screamed a lot. Technically, he hadn't committed a crime, and he did reach his destination without harming me. A week later, I saw a news article about a man who had been arrested after causing a scene at a restaurant, claiming he was off medication for a severe psychological condition. The mugshot in the paper looked a lot like my passenger. I'll never be certain it was him, but it would explain the erratic behavior. Maybe he truly didn't remember asking those questions over and over, and those screams were the only outlet for whatever torment was raging in his mind. What I do know is that I never want to experience anything like that ride again. The feeling of being trapped with someone who was behaving so unpredictably, one moment friendly, the next horrifying, left an impression on me. Now every time a passenger repeats themselves, or even raises their voice, my heart skips a beat. I find myself gripping the wheel, ready to dial 911 at the slightest sign of danger. I often wonder about that man in the suit. Did he get help? Does he even recall the Uber ride that nearly scared the life out of his driver? Perhaps I'll never find out. But I took his parting words to heart. I do watch out for the crazy people, and he's at the top of the list. After all, I've already met one of them. Driving late at night often meant dealing with drunk or rowdy passengers, and I thought I had seen it all. But nothing prepared me for the two men who got in my car one Saturday night and casually discussed my potential death as if it were a fun thought experiment. It was around 1 a.m. when I accepted a high-paying Uber Select fare. Two guys in their late 20s tumbled into my car outside a downtown club, laughing and reeking of whiskey. One slid into the front passenger seat, and the other sat directly behind me. They were well dressed, maybe out celebrating something, and initially seemed like your typical tipsy friends looking to continue their party elsewhere. "Thanks for picking us up, man," slurred the one in front. "We're headed to the Silver Stallion," he added, naming a gentleman's club about 40 miles away. A long drive, but the promise of an expensive fare made it worth it. I confirmed the destination and started the trip. For the first 10 minutes, it was mostly the two of them joking with each other, cackling about stories I couldn't follow. I kept my eyes on the road, content to let them amuse themselves. Then the guy in the front seat turned his attention to me abruptly. "So, dude, you do this full time? Driving people around at night?" he asked. "Just part-time," I said. "It helps pay the bills." He nodded slowly, then without any change in tone, he asked, "You ever wonder what would happen if someone grabbed the steering wheel from you right now?" I felt a small spike of alarm. I gave a nervous chuckle, thinking I misheard. Can't say it's crossed my mind," I replied, trying to keep things light. He continued staring at me, a sloppy grin on his face. "But what would you do if I just yanked it? Sent us flying into oncoming traffic?" He elaborated, making a sudden jerking motion towards the wheel. Instinctively, I flinched, tightening my grip. The car swerved just a hair before I steadied it. The man in the back seat laughed, a little too loud for comfort. "Whoa, relax," I said, forcing a smile though my heart rate was climbing. "Let's not try anything like that." The front seat passenger leaned back, still grinning as if it was all a joke. "Just kidding, bro. I hoped that was the end of it." But my hopes were quickly dashed. The guy behind me piped up in a low voice, "Hey, ever thought about what would happen if someone in the back seat put you in a chokehold while you were driving?" My blood ran cold at the words. In the rearview mirror, I could see his eyes fixed on me with a disturbing intensity. I tried to laugh it off. "Nope, can't say I have. You guys must really love action movies, huh? Come on, humor us," the man behind me insisted. Say, I wrapped something around your neck right now. What do you think would happen to the car?" He stretched his arms out mockingly, as if reaching toward me, though he didn't actually touch me. His friend in the front snickered. I forced a grin, but my palms were beginning to sweat on the wheel. I'd probably crash, and we'd all die. "So let's not do that, okay?" I said, as firmly as I could, while trying not to escalate things. The two exchanged a glance and laughed, but there was an edge to it. The one in front wasn't done. "We're just asking hypotheticals, man. Don't freak out." His voice took on a sinister casualness. "What if I grabbed the wheel and you tried to stop me? Think you'd be fast enough?" He made another sudden feint toward the steering wheel. I jerked it away, the car wobbling within its lane. My heart pounded in my throat. We were speeding down a freeway, and the last thing I wanted was for these lunatics to actually follow through on their threats. The guy in the back leaned forward, his breath hot on the back of my neck. "Or what if I just started hitting you from behind while you're driving? Ever wonder if you could even defend yourself?" He whispered, almost drowned by the road noise but dripping with menace. That was enough. I needed to end this ride before their what-ifs became reality. I glanced at the GPS. We were still at least 20 miles from their requested club, driving along a fairly empty stretch of highway now. An exit for a well-lit rest stop was coming up in half a mile. Thinking on my feet, I eased my foot off the accelerator. "Hey guys," I said, injecting a note of urgency in my voice. "Sorry, I think one of my tires is feeling really low or something. I should pull over at this rest stop to check it out. Don't want to risk an accident." Without waiting for their response, I flipped on my hazard lights and signaled toward the exit. The front passenger muttered something like, "Oh, come on," but I was already taking the ramp. I pulled into the brightly lit gas station area of the rest stop, under the gaze of a surveillance camera and a few onlookers fueling their cars. As soon as I rolled to a stop near the pumps, I put the car in park and unlocked the doors. "I'm just going to check the tires," I said quickly. My voice shook a little, despite my attempt to sound nonchalant. I stepped out into the cold night air, heart hammering, and moved deliberately to the rear tire, pretending to inspect it. The two men got out as well, stretching and grumbling. Under the fluorescent lights, they looked less intimidating, more drunk and foolish, but I wasn't taking chances. There were other people around here, safety in numbers. I walked to the driver's door and leaned in. "Tire looks fine. You know, on second thought, I'm not comfortable continuing this trip. I can end it here and not charge you for the extra distance to the rest stop. There are other Ubers around, or you can go inside and call someone." I tried to sound apologetic but firm. The guy in front looked at me in disbelief. "Seriously, you're ditching us here? You can't take a joke." The one from the back seat added, now sounding more annoyed than dangerous. I stood my ground, one hand on my phone, ready to call 911 if needed. "Sorry, I just don't feel safe continuing. You'll get a full refund for the cancellation and the portion I didn't T-drive." They exchanged irritated looks. For a moment, I thought they might actually try to confront me, but then the front seat guy just threw his hands up. "Whatever, man, you're crazy," he said, trying to save face. "Yeah, whatever," echoed his friend as they stumbled away, heading toward the rest stop convenience store, cursing under their breaths. I quickly got back in my car, locked the doors, and ended the ride on the app. My hands were trembling badly as I navigated back to the highway, leaving those two behind. I didn't care about the lost fare or if they left me a 1-star review in retaliation. I was just thankful I got away without testing any of their morbid hypotheticals. Later that night, safe at home, I replayed it in my mind and felt a surge of anger and fear. Their twisted sense of humor had put all of us in real danger. They might have thought it was funny to scare the Uber driver, but I have no doubt that if I hadn't pulled over, their drunken curiosity could have turned deadly. They were treating me like a plaything in some cruel game of chicken. I learned to trust my gut after that. If a passenger ever starts making me feel unsafe, I don't hesitate to terminate the ride. I'd rather lose a bit of money than risk my life. Occasionally, I wonder if those guys even remember what they said that night, or if they chalked it up to just another wild outing. For me, it's unforgettable. Every time I glance at the empty front seat, I half expect to see a pair of hands lunging for the wheel, and it sends a chill down my spine. I'm just grateful I still have control of the car and my fate. No drunk strangers, what if, will ever change that again. The last thing I remember from that night was sliding into the back seat of an Uber, struggling to keep my eyes open. The first thing I remember the next morning was the cold shock of waking up in a strange hotel room, with my Uber driver's half-naked body sprawled next to me. It was a Friday night in Los Angeles, and I had been out celebrating my best friend's birthday at a club. I rarely drank much, but that night we'd gone a little overboard with the shots. By 2 a.m., I was thoroughly intoxicated, and my friend insisted on getting me home safe. I vaguely recall the bouncer helping me outside and ordering an Uber on my phone. Since I was in no state to do it myself, he even helped me into the car when it arrived. The driver was a man, maybe mid-30s, with a shaved head and a friendly smile. "Don't worry, I'll get her home safe," I faintly remember him assuring my friend or the bouncer as I slumped against the back seat. The ride itself is mostly a blur. I have hazy flashes of the driver asking me if I was okay, and me mumbling my address. The city lights smeared past the window as exhaustion and alcohol pulled me under. The last semi-coherent thought I had was relief at being on my way home, and then everything went dark. When I finally regained consciousness, I knew immediately something was very wrong. I awoke face down on a stiff, unfamiliar bed. My head was pounding, mouth dry as cotton. The room was dim, the curtains drawn, but faint morning light seeped in. This wasn't my bedroom. As confusion flooded me, I turned over and froze. There was a man lying on the bed beside me, my Uber driver. He was shirtless, on top of the covers, fast asleep. For a second, my foggy brain couldn't process it. Why was he here? Why was I here? I realized with horror that I wasn't wearing my shoes, and my dress strap was slipped off one shoulder. A surge of panic and adrenaline sobered me up real fast. I slipped out of the bed as quietly as possible, praying he wouldn't wake. My heart was thundering in my chest. I spotted my purse and phone dumped on a small table near the TV. The driver groaned and shifted slightly, but didn't wake. I tiptoed to my belongings, never taking my eyes off him. My mind was screaming, "Get out, get out, get out." Clutching my purse to my chest, I inched toward the door. The floor creaked under my weight and I winced, glancing back. He was still asleep, thankfully. I reached the door and slowly unlatched the deadbolt, turning the knob with shaking hands. Every second felt agonizingly long, my breath trapped in my throat. Finally, I pulled the door open and slipped out into the bright, mid-morning daylight. I stood on the exterior walkway of a motel, the kind with doors opening to the outside. Room 108, as the big metal numbers indicated. Below me, a nearly empty parking lot stretched out, and beyond that, a main road. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might faint, but I forced myself to move. I hurried down the steps, shoes in hand. Once my bare feet hit the pavement, I ran. I didn't stop running until I was across the street at a 24-hour diner, where the startled hostess must have thought I looked crazed, barefoot, makeup smudged, eyes wide with terror. I asked if I could use their phone to call 911, because I feared my kidnapper was still nearby. The staff sat me down in a booth, brought me water, and called the police for me when I struggled to explain what had happened. Minutes later, as I was beginning to shake and cry from the shock, 2 police officers arrived. Between sobs and with the anchor of a hot coffee the waitress brought me, I managed to tell them everything I remembered. The club, the bouncer ordering the Uber, the driver, and then waking up here. It was obvious I had been kidnapped, possibly assaulted, by the very person entrusted to take me home safely. One officer went to the motel to apprehend the man, while the other stayed with me, gently asking more questions. As I spoke, more details trickled back. I recalled the car stopping at one point, and the driver asking if I was okay. I might have passed out again after that. I definitely did not remember arriving at my home, or consenting to go anywhere else. The truly sickening realization settled on me. He must have driven me somewhere else entirely, likely to this motel, while I was unconscious. The thought made me feel physically ill. The police soon confirmed it. The driver, a man named Frederick, had indeed brought me to the motel and paid for a room using cash. When they arrested him, he claimed through flimsy excuses that he was trying to help because I was so drunk and he didn't know my address. But I knew he had my address from the app, and my friend had told him I just needed to get home. They later found evidence that made it clear his intentions were far from benign. I was lucky, unbelievably lucky, that he had passed out or gotten careless, and that I woke up when I did. The fact that I escaped unharmed feels like a miracle. I was checked at a hospital, aside from some bruises on my arms. Where it looked like I'd been dragged or carried, I was okay. They tested my blood for any drugs in case he had dosed me, but everything came back negative. It seems alcohol was the only thing in my system. I had simply been too drunk to resist. The horror of imagining what could have happened, what almost certainly would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did, still keeps me up at night. If I had stirred even a few minutes later, I might have found myself in the middle of an assault or worse. The driver was charged with kidnapping and intent to commit sexual assault. I learned later that I was in T. His first victim, another intoxicated woman, had reported a similarly creepy incident with him, but she'd gotten away before he could do anything, and hadn't pursued charges at the time. Knowing that sends chills through me. This predator had been prowling the city under the guise of a friendly rideshare driver, looking for vulnerable passengers to prey upon. I haven't taken an Uber or any rideshare since. The very idea of getting into a stranger's car again makes me nauseous. I still have nightmares of waking up trapped in that motel room with him looming over me. The irony is that rideshare apps are supposed to be a safe way to get home when you're really not sober. That night, I did everything I was supposed to. I didn't drive drunk, I trusted the rideshare system, and I had people looking out for me. And still, I ended up in a nightmare. Now, whenever a friend heads out for a night of drinking, I insist they share their ride status with someone and have a plan. I was fortunate to wake up when I did, but I shudder to think of those who didn't wake up in time. The memory of opening my eyes in that unfamiliar room, the horror and confusion and violation I felt, is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. That morning, I truly learned that monsters can be hiding behind the most benign smiles, and a simple ride home can become the stuff of lifelong nightmares. I'm just grateful I escaped mine. It was a sunny afternoon when I slid into the back seat of an Uber, never expecting that a routine ride would turn into one of the creepiest encounters of my life. By the end of that ride, I felt like my privacy had been utterly violated, and I would realize this was not a one-time fluke. I had hailed an Uber to take me cross town to a job interview. The driver, whose name was Sam on the app, arrived promptly. He was an unassuming middle-aged guy with a paunch and a friendly demeanor. I noted the 4.8-star rating and felt at ease as I greeted him and climbed in. The first part of the ride was uneventful. I was reviewing my resume on my phone, while he made small talk about the weather and traffic. After about 10 minutes, we hit a red light near a busy intersection. Suddenly, Sam turned halfway around in his seat and said, "Hey, I want to show you something." I looked up, a bit startled by his eager tone. He was holding up his phone toward me. On the screen was a photo. At first, it didn't register what I was looking at. It appeared to be a picture of a woman walking on a sidewalk. She had long brown hair, wearing a blue blouse. My heart skipped. It was me. The photo was of me, apparently taken earlier that day. In it, I was indeed walking down a street, the very street in my neighborhood where I'd taken a short stroll that morning to get coffee. I felt a flush of confusion and alarm. Is that me?" I asked, my voice faltering. Sam grinned in the mirror. "Yeah, I saw you walking earlier today, and I thought, wow, what a small world that I get to pick you up as a rider later. So I snapped a picture to show you." He chuckled, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. My stomach turned. I had never seen this man before, to my knowledge. Yet here he was casually admitting he had taken a photo of me without my consent, long before I ever got into his car. Questions swirled in my mind. Had he recognized me from the app photo and gone looking for me? Or was it pure coincidence he saw me? Either way, the fact that he photographed me secretly felt like a massive violation. I tried to keep my composure. "That's a little creepy, don't you think?" I said with a nervous laugh, hoping to make him realize this wasn't okay. He seemed surprised by my reaction. "Creepy? Nah, I'm sorry if it weirds you out. I just thought you looked pretty walking there, and I mean, what are the odds we'd meet? I wanted to show you." I muttered something along the lines of "please don't do that," and scooted a little closer to the door. Suddenly, very aware that I was locked in a moving vehicle with this man. The traffic light mercifully turned green and he refocused on driving. But I caught him glancing at me in the rearview mirror occasionally, as if assessing my mood. The rest of the ride was tense. He tried to chat a couple more times, complimenting my outfit, asking if I lived in that neighborhood. I answered in the barest monosyllables, heart still pounding, counting the minutes until I'd be out of this car. When we finally pulled up to the office building for my interview, I was so unsettled I nearly forgot to grab a portfolio I had brought. As I reached for it, Sam turned around once more and said, "Hey, maybe after your interview I can give you a ride back. I'll be in the area." "No thanks," I blurted, and practically threw a $5 bill over the seat. I just wanted to leave without any more discussion. I jumped out and speed walked away, not looking back. After a few minutes inside the lobby, I peeked out and saw his car was gone. I finally exhaled the breath I'd been holding. The shock of that encounter took a while to shake off. I went into my job interview still rattled, though I tried my best to appear composed. I reported the incident to Uber later that day, describing how the driver had shown me a photo he took of me without permission. I never heard what came of it, but I gave him a 1-star review and blocked further contact through the app. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that it was a one-time thing. But disturbingly, a couple months later, it happened again, with a different driver. I had called an Uber to get home from a friend's house one evening. This new driver, a younger guy, maybe 25 or so, was very chatty. At some point he mentioned, "You look familiar. Are you on Facebook?" I found that odd. I wasn't sure how my face would be familiar to a random Uber driver. He then said, "Yeah, I think I saw your profile picture pop up on the app when I accepted the ride and I realized I recognized you from online. You're friends with my cousin, aren't you?" I stared at him, taken aback. I wasn't friends with any young men that I knew of in this area. Certainly not his cousin, as far as I could tell. I don't think so. I don't recall meeting you or anyone related," I said carefully. He just smiled. "No, I'm pretty sure I've seen your Facebook. You're Sarah, right?" My blood ran cold. I had deliberately not shared my full name or any social media with any drivers. They only see your first name on the Uber app, and I have a fairly common first name. How could he possibly know who I was, unless he'd gone digging? "Actually, no, that's not my name," I lied swiftly. The driver chuckled, as if he didn't believe me. "Ah, maybe I'm mistaken then. Sorry about that." But his tone didn't sound sorry, it sounded playful. I spent the rest of that ride with my guard all the way up, barely responding to his attempts at conversation. When he dropped me off, I checked my Facebook privacy settings, panicked. It dawned on me that perhaps from my phone number or some cross-referencing, these drivers were able to find my social media. Or maybe it was just an excuse to hit on me. Either way, it was deeply unsettling. 2 separate incidents, 2 different drivers, both behaving like stalkers. After that, I changed my profile picture on the Uber app to something abstract, tightened all my social media privacy settings, and started using the feature that lets you hide your exact pickup address, opting to walk a block away before calling the car. My trust was shaken badly. These experiences taught me that even a seemingly routine Uber ride can turn invasive. The fact that a driver would not only recognize me, but also take the time to capture my image without consent made me feel like prey being watched. Now, whenever I get into a rideshare, I find myself scrutinizing the driver's behavior more closely. If anyone ever tried to show me a photo of myself again, I'd document it and possibly even involve law enforcement, not just the rideshare company. I consider myself lucky that neither of those encounters escalated beyond creepy behavior, but they left a lasting mark. To this day, whenever I'm walking alone and spot a car slowing down nearby, I get a spike of paranoia, wondering if it's someone who has seen me before in some app or photo, someone who might be watching. A simple snapshot from a stranger has forever changed the way I see my own city streets. For a while, I told myself that maybe he was just being friendly, that maybe I was overreacting. But as the messages kept coming and then he appeared outside my apartment, I knew I wasn't just imagining things. My Uber driver had crossed a line into full-on stalking. It started out innocently enough. I took a lift home after a late shift at work. It was an uneventful ride, or so I thought at the time. The driver was a man named Leo, maybe in his early 30s, with a heavy accent and a silver cross hanging from his rearview mirror. He made a bit of small talk during the drive, asked if I was from the city, if I worked nearby. I answered politely but briefly, as I was exhausted. He dropped me off in front of my apartment building around 9 p.m. I thanked him and headed inside. Nothing seemed amiss. About an hour later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number texting me. "Hi, it's Leo from Lyft. You made it home okay?" I was a bit taken aback. Drivers don't usually use your personal number, but Lyft does route texts through real numbers sometimes. I replied, "Yes, thanks. I didn't want to be rude." He replied immediately, "You looked stressed. Want to grab a drink and relax?" Alarm bells started to ring. This was not normal or professional. I texted back, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine. Have a good night." A polite dismissal, I thought. His next message came within seconds. "We could watch a movie at your place. I know the area, I'm close by." Now I was outright disturbed. He indeed did know the area. He had just been in front of my building. My heart skipped a beat, realizing he could very well still be nearby. I didn't respond this time. Instead, I took a screenshot of the conversation, thinking I might need to report this to Lyft. My hands were trembling slightly as I set the phone down. About 5 minutes passed with no further texts, and I hoped that maybe he got the hint. I double-checked that my door was locked and all my lights were off, just in case. I lived alone and felt suddenly very vulnerable. Then my phone rang, an unknown number. I had a gut feeling it was him, so I didn't pick up. No voicemail. A minute later, another text. "I'm outside." My stomach dropped. I peeked out my living room window from the side, careful not to be seen. Parked across the street under a street lamp was a car idling. It looked like the same grey Honda Civic that had dropped me off. Another text popped up. "I just want to talk. You seemed sad. I can come up." The audacity and creepiness of it made my skin crawl. He was treating my silence as an invitation to escalate. At this point, fear had overpowered my attempt at politeness. I dialed 911. As I quietly explained the situation to the dispatcher, I heard a car door slam outside. I risked another glance through the curtain. Leo was standing on the sidewalk, looking up at my building, phone in hand, likely texting or trying to call me again. I felt sick. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and that a patrol car was on its way. Meanwhile, Leo started pacing. He wasn't yelling or making a scene. It was as if he thought this was a romantic gesture, a grand attempt to win me over by showing up unannounced. He sent another message while I watched him from the dark of my window. "I know you're home. Just let me in for a few minutes, okay?" That was it. The mixture of anger and fear in me boiled over. I wasn't going to respond, but I wanted him to know this was absolutely not okay. Against the 911 dispatcher's advice, I texted back, "Leave now or I'm calling the police." He looked at his phone, reading the message. I couldn't quite make out his expression in the dim light, but he stopped pacing. For a second I thought he might actually go. Instead, he typed something. My phone buzzed. "You wouldn't do that. I just want to see you." My blood was pounding in my ears. "The officers are almost there," the dispatcher assured me in my ear. I remained crouched by the window, heart hammering. Leo stepped off the curb and actually started crossing the street toward my building. I felt a jolt of panic. Was he going to try to get in? My building's front door was locked, but if someone exited or if he buzzed random apartments, who knows? Just then, a police cruiser silently rolled up to the corner, headlights off. They must have seen him. because two officers jumped out and called to him. Leo was startled. He turned and immediately started explaining something. One officer approached him while the other shone a flashlight into his car. I finally breathed, realizing they'd gotten there just in time. I thanked the dispatcher and hung up, watching as the officers spoke with him. After a few tense minutes, one of the officers came to my building door. I hurried down to let him in, making sure Leo was firmly in the other cop's custody before opening the door. They took my statement right there in the lobby, while another unit arrived to question Leo further. He kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, that he was just trying to return something I left in his car. A blatant lie. I had all my belongings. I showed the police the text messages and their faces grew serious. That pretty much shattered any innocent explanation Leo could offer. In the end, they charged him with harassment. Lyft deactivated his account permanently when I reported him, and I got a call from someone at Lyft Corporate who apologized. I don't know what happened to Leo legally. I obtained a restraining order against him and luckily never saw him again. The whole ordeal shook me deeply. For weeks, I had trouble sleeping, constantly jolting awake at the slightest sound, checking my window, expecting to see that grey Civic lurking. I felt paranoid whenever I left my building, scanning the street for any sign of him. What haunts me is how normal the ride was, and how quickly it turned into a nightmare once I was home. I've since learned to never give any personal info or even polite signals that could be misconstrued. A simple act of courtesy, like responding to a text from a driver, I now realize can be seen as encouragement by someone unstable. Now, whenever I use a rideshare, I have a rule. No direct contact after the ride is over, no matter what. If a driver ever messages me unexpectedly, I block the number and report it immediately. And if any driver ever showed up at my home like that again, I wouldn't hesitate to involve the police from the very start. That night, I felt trapped in my own home by someone who was supposed to provide a service, not terrorize me. The image of him standing under that street lamp, looking up for me, will forever be burned in my mind. Sometimes the end of a ride doesn't mean you're safely home. Sometimes the nightmare follows you right to your doorstep. When I tapped Request Uber on my phone that cold February night, I never imagined I was stepping into the car of a man in the middle of a killing spree. The realization that I had unknowingly shared a ride with a bloodthirsty killer still chills me to the core. It happened in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 2016. I was a college student at the time. That evening, a friend and I were out for dinner and a movie. Midway through the movie, phones around the theater started buzzing with emergency alerts. An active shooter was reportedly moving through the city, targeting people at random. We left the theater in a hurry, heart pounding with fear at the breaking news. My friend lived on campus nearby, but I had parked my car across town. With a shooter on the loose, I wasn't going to walk alone. So I did what seemed logical. I called an Uber to pick me up at the theater and drive me to my car. Better to be driven than be on foot, exposed. The Uber that arrived was a dark Chevy sedan. The driver, Jason, according to the app, was a middle-aged guy with a salt and pepper beard and a friendly manner. He asked me if I'd heard about the craziness happening in town tonight. I said yes, something about a shooter, and he shook his head. Terrible, isn't it? You be careful out there, he said. We set off toward my car. Along the way, the driver chatted amiably about how quiet the night had been for him, aside from all these sirens and alerts. I was anxious, constantly glancing at my phone for updates on the shooter, but talking kept me somewhat calm. At one point, as we passed near an apartment complex, we saw flashing red and blue lights. Police cars blocking off a parking lot entrance. Must be something to do with that shooter, Jason muttered. I noticed he gripped the wheel a bit tighter as we slowly drove by the commotion. We continued on, and within a few minutes, I arrived at my car. He dropped me off and urged me to get home safe. I thanked him, gave him a 5-star rating for being out driving on such a tense night, and we parted ways. It wasn't until the next day that the horrifying truth came out. The active shooter who had terrorized Kalamazoo that night had been caught. I was at home with the news on when they flashed the suspect's photo. My stomach dropped. It was Jason, my Uber driver. He had been the shooter all along. I felt the blood drain from my face as details emerged. Over the course of that night, in between picking up unsuspecting passengers, this man had gone on a rampage around the city. He shot people, seemingly at random, a woman outside her apartment, a father and son at a car dealership, a group of people in a restaurant parking lot. 6 people were killed, and 2 others seriously injured. And in the middle of all that chaos, he was still driving for Uber, picking up fares as if nothing was wrong. My phone almost slipped from my hand. I began to shake uncontrollably as it truly hit me. I had sat inches away from a mass murderer, making small talk while his gun was likely tucked in his waistband the entire time. The reason those police lights were near that apartment complex, he had just shot someone there minutes before picking me up, though I didn't know it then. I contacted the police as soon as I processed it, and they interviewed me along with every other rider he transported that night. I learned I was one of the lucky ones. He hadn't harmed any passengers during his rampage. It seems his victims were chosen in between rides, during moments he wasn't ferrying people around. Perhaps the presence of riders kept him playing normal for brief intervals. To this day, I can't get over the what-ifs. What if he had decided to turn on me? What if something I said or did set him off? The thought that I had effectively used an active shooter as my personal chauffeur, without knowing it, is something out of a nightmare. In the aftermath, I had nightmares for months. I'd dreamed that I was in the back seat again, and he would turn around with a gun in his hand, smiling that friendly smile as he aimed it at me. I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding. It took a long time for me to use rideshares again, and even now, every time I get into an Uber, I find myself scrutinizing the driver's face, wondering what secrets they might be hiding behind polite chatter. The world first heard about the Uber killer on the news, but to me he wasn't a headline. He was a real person who looked me in the eye and wished me a safe night. I still grapple with that cognitive dissonance. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it drives a humble sedan and has a 5-star rating. I'm grateful I survived that ride, and horrified for those who crossed his path in far worse ways than I did. Sharing a car with a murderer is a brush with darkness I'll never forget. Whenever I think about complaining that my Uber is late or the driver took a wrong turn, I stop and remind myself it could be so much worse. You truly never know who is behind the wheel. I sure didn't. After years of driving for Uber, I considered myself pretty unflappable. I've had drunk passengers, angry passengers, even a few scary ones. But nothing prepared me for the night I picked up a passenger who simply vanished into thin air. To this day, I cannot explain what happened, and it still sends chills down my spine. I had just started my night shift, sticking around the outskirts of the military base near San Antonio, where I often got fares. It was a Friday, just after dusk, when I accepted a ride request from a young man named Mikey. The pickup location was a spot near the base gates. Mikey got in the back seat, and he looked to be about 19 or 20. He wore a navy blue service uniform, which made sense, likely a soldier heading somewhere. He had a duffel bag with him and a tired, distant look in his eyes. Headed to Fort Hood, he said, showing me the address on his phone. Fort Hood was a good couple of hours' drive north. A long trip, but I was okay with it. He mentioned he was trying to get home to his wife, Marissa, who was waiting for him in New York after his discharge. I congratulated him on finishing his service, and we set off. We chatted a bit as we left the city. He was soft-spoken and polite, told me he had been in the Navy for 2 years and was now getting out. There was a melancholy to him. He said he hadn't seen his wife in months and couldn't wait to reunite with her. About 30 minutes into the drive, just as we were really hitting a stretch of empty highway, Mikey politely asked if we could pull over at a gas station so he could use the restroom. "No problem," I said, spotting an exit for a small truck stop coming up. I pulled off and found the gas station, which was still lit up, but looked like it was about to close for the night. He hopped out quickly, thanking me, and headed inside while I stayed in the car, fiddling with the radio. I remember distinctly that a classic rock song was playing faintly over the station's outdoor speakers as I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I looked toward the convenience store. The lights inside were off, and I saw the clerk locking the front door. I got out, a bit concerned, and called over. "Hey, my passenger went inside to use the restroom. Is he still in there?" The clerk looked at me, puzzled. "No one's inside, friend. I'm about to close up." A confused chill prickled the back of my neck. "He didn't come out. Young guy in a navy uniform." The clerk shook his head. "I saw you pull in and you sitting there, but I never saw anyone get out of your car." My mouth went dry. That made no sense. I insisted he definitely went in. "Could you maybe check the restroom real quick? I'm worried he might have passed out or something." He shrugged and reopened the door long enough to glance around inside, even checked the single-stall restroom. He returned with a frown. "Nobody here, and I need to lock up." "Sorry," utterly perplexed. I thanked him and stepped away. I even peered around the side of the building, thinking maybe Mikey had gone around back for some reason, but he was nowhere to be seen. I got back into my car, a creeping sense of unease blossoming. His duffel bag, I realized it was gone. I knew he'd had it at the start of the trip, but I hadn't noticed if he took it with him into the station. It wasn't in the back seat or trunk anymore. It was as if both he and his bag had evaporated. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he decided to abandon the ride and leave without telling me. But why leave his driver mid-trip in an unfamiliar place, especially when his next destination was hours away? And more to the point, how did I not see him leave? I'd been parked right there the whole time. Feeling a bit spooked, I pulled out of the gas station and parked under a streetlight by the road. I opened the Uber app to see if he'd possibly cancelled the ride while I was in T looking. My trip with Mikey was strangely no longer active. It showed up as completed. He must have manually ended it, I thought. Maybe he had an emergency or changed plans. I decided I'd wait a little longer, just in case he came back looking for me. Not 5 minutes later, a patrol car, which must have seen my hazard lights, pulled into the gas station. A military police officer stepped out and approached. "Everything okay?" he asked. I explained the bizarre situation, that my passenger had gone inside and apparently disappeared. The officer looked at me as if weighing my sincerity. Then he asked the passenger's name. "Mikey, Michael, I think," I said, and gave the description. When I mentioned the wife named Marissa in New York, the officer's face changed. He requested I wait, and he went to make a phone call, stepping aside. When he returned, his tone was a bit more somber. He asked to see my ID and Uber app info, which I showed him. Then he told me something that made my head spin. A young Navy sailor named Michael, matching that description, had died in a car accident 2 weeks earlier while on leave, en route to see his wife in New York. The officer knew because the story had spread around the base. I stammered in protest. "That can't be. He was just in my car." I talked to him. The officer gave me a long, searching look. "All I know is, no one should have been at that pickup point tonight. It's near the memorial outside the base. I believe you encountered something, but I can't explain it." He paused, then quietly added, "You're not the first to tell a story like this around here." By this point, my hands were shaking. I didn't know what to believe. The officer kindly offered to follow me back to the highway, which I accepted. I drove home in a daze, mind racing the whole way. I kept checking my back seat, half expecting to see Mikey suddenly sitting there again, but it was always empty. A few days later, still deeply unsettled, I spoke with a friend of mine who worked on base. I carefully recounted what happened, and he got wide-eyed. He told me that there's a bit of local lore about that area. People talk about seeing a young man in a military uniform hitchhiking or requesting rides, who then disappears. Essentially, a ghost story. I had always laughed those off as nonsense. Not anymore. I reviewed my trip log and saw that indeed the ride had somehow ended at the exact time we pulled into that gas station. Mikey even left me a 5-star rating and a $20 tip. I have no idea what to make of that. It sent a shiver right through me. I still have the screenshot of that completed ride, his name and avatar, the route that bizarrely terminates at that gas station with no drop-off point. It's the only proof I have that I didn't just imagine the whole thing. To this day, whenever I pass that gas station or drive near the base at night, I find myself glancing at the passenger seat or in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a familiar Navy uniform there. I've even had a couple of riders jokingly ask if I ever picked up a ghost, to which I just force a laugh. But inside, I know I did. I gave a ride to someone who wasn't among the living, a passenger who simply vanished without a trace. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I don't think I'll ever fully understand what happened that night on that lonely stretch of road. But I'll remember Mikey's soft voice and the sadness in his eyes for as long as I live. I never thought a routine late-night pickup could turn into a fight for my life. But that's exactly what happened on a muggy August night. As a single mum driving for Uber to make ends meet, I had always been cautious. Yet I found myself staring death in the face in the form of a passenger in a hoodie with a cold, dark stare. It was just after midnight when I got a ping to pick up a rider at a bar in Boca Raton. I had just finished a food delivery nearby, so I was in the area. The rider's name was Jonathan. When I pulled up, a tall man in a black hoodie slid into my back seat. I greeted him and noted he didn't seem drunk. In fact, he was eerily quiet. We began the drive. He wanted to go to an address about 20 minutes away, near Deerfield Beach. I tried some light conversation, asked if he'd had a good night. He responded with a few polite questions of his own. Was I from around here? Do I drive late nights often? Do I have family? I remember him specifically asking if I was a single mom, which in hindsight was a red flag. I mentioned I had a young son, and that I drove nights to help pay for school and bills. He just said that's admirable softly. We were driving on the highway, not much traffic at this hour. Out of nowhere, I felt a sudden movement behind me. In a flash, an arm hooked around the front of my neck, and I felt the cold press of a blade against my throat. My heart exploded into overdrive as I realized Jonathan had lunged forward between the seats. "Don't fight," he hissed. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were wild and predatory. With his other hand, he reached around and actually put the car in neutral. The vehicle coasted as he maintained the knife at my neck. "Please," I gasped, barely able to speak. He spoke calmly, almost in my ear. "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to make your son an orphan." My blood ran ice cold at those words. This wasn't a robbery. He explicitly said he only got in my Uber to kill me. As those words sank in, a surge of survival instinct kicked in. The car was drifting and starting to veer without acceleration. We were on a sparsely lit stretch of road. I knew if the car crashed at high speed, we both might die. Or, if it stopped, he could overpower me. I had to act. With a primal scream, I wrenched the steering wheel hard to the right, towards the shoulder, and then deliberately across the rumble strips back left. The car jerked violently, zigzagging. The sudden motion threw Jonathan off balance as he hadn't buckled in. He cursed and the knife nicked me. I felt a hot streak of pain as it cut along the side of my neck, but adrenaline had taken over. I hit the brakes and swerved again, causing him to tumble against the back seat. He roared in anger and scrambled forward again, this time slashing wildly. The knife plunged into my right forearm as I raised it to protect my neck. Searing pain shot up my arm, warm blood instantly soaking my sleeve. I screamed but managed to elbow him in the face with my left arm, while he was partly sprawled over the console. The car was slowing but not yet stopped. It rolled onto the grassy shoulder and bumped to a halt against a small road sign with a jolt. We weren't going fast, but the impact was enough to momentarily disorient both of us. He recovered first, grabbing at me again. I twisted in my seat, flailing with my injured arm and kicking back. He slashed the knife towards my chest. I felt the tip cut into my side, a flare of pain, but shallow. I was sobbing, screaming, "Help, help," into the darkness, praying someone would hear. In a desperate move, I flung open my driver's door and half fell out onto the ground. He lunged, catching my foot, trying to drag me back. I kicked frantically, my heel striking his face or shoulder. He grunted and let go for a split second. That was all I needed. I crawled, then stumbled to my feet, and ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms despite the pain. Headlights appeared. Thank God, a car was approaching from behind us. I must have been a sight, bloodied and frantic. The car slowed. A woman rolled down her window as I practically threw myself toward her hood, yelling for help. Behind me, Jonathan emerged from my car, knife in hand. The woman in the car took one look, and I heard her shout to her passenger to call 911. Then, incredibly, she honked and started pulling forward, inching her car between me and my attacker. She was trying to shield me. Jonathan, seeing the interference, seemed to calculate that his window of opportunity was closing. He rushed back to my car, jumped in the driver's seat, and peeled out, tires screeching, leaving me trembling on the roadside. He stole my car to escape. The kind strangers stayed with me until police and an ambulance arrived. I was shaking uncontrollably, sobbing that my son almost lost his mother that night. I remember one officer wrapping his jacket around me as paramedics bandaged my arm and the superficial cut on my neck. The wounds on my arm required stitches. I'd been stabbed multiple times there, and my forearm was a mess of blood, but thankfully, none of the cuts were immediately life-threatening. My neck had a shallow slice. Had he pressed just a bit harder or at a different angle, it could have been fatal. Within an hour, police had located my car, abandoned a few miles away. They found Jonathan hiding in a wooded area not far from there, the bloody knife still on him. I was taken to the hospital, and from my bed I gave a detailed statement. The gravity of it hit me fully when a detective told me, "You're lucky to be alive. Most people in your situation wouldn't be." Apparently, Jonathan had a violent history. He later confessed that he'd de-seen me at the pickup and decided I would be his target at random. There was no rhyme or reason, just pure evil whim. He was charged with attempted murder, carjacking, and assault with a deadly weapon. Physically, I healed over the next few weeks. Dozens of stitches in my arm, a scar on my neck that will always remind me how close I came. Emotionally, that's a different story. I couldn't bring myself to drive for Uber for a long time after. For months, I would wake up screaming, imagining that arm looping around my throat and that voice snarling in my ear. The hardest part was explaining to my little boy why Mummy was hurt. I told him a bad man hurt me, but I was okay now. What I didn't tell him was how. In that moment, hearing I'd be making him an orphan, I fought with every ounce of strength and wit I had. I fought for him. I eventually met the woman who stopped to help. She found me through social media after hearing about the incident on the news. She said when she saw me covered in blood and that man coming after me, she thought of her own mother and just reacted. I credit her with saving my life. If she hadn't paused and intervened, even momentarily, I'm not sure I'd be here to tell this story. These days, I still drive, but with extreme caution and mostly daylight hours. I also carry a stun gun and pepper spray within reach in the car. I pray I never have to use them. The first few times I got back behind the wheel with a passenger in the back, I was jumpy at every sound and movement. But I refuse to live in fear forever. I won't let him take any more from me. I have stared pure evil in the face through my rearview mirror. I survived by a combination of luck, quick thinking, and sheer will. Not everyone who encounters a monster on their ride is as fortunate. Every time I buckle my seatbelt now, I feel the ridges of the scar on my neck, and I remind myself, not today. I am alive, I am here for my son, and I will never take my safety for granted again.